This case has got such momentum now. It's become so big. I think 1 million people have signed a petition. I mean, this is unprecedented. It's got to a point where he has to address it. And even if that means there is some people who will be out of scope and there will be some other campaigns and unhappiness, he will have to draw the line somewhere.
The government is discovering that you can't solve a prisons crisis by releasing serious violent criminals. And this is why. Hi everyone, Neil here, and we're going to start this episode with, a statement that I would have thought would be pretty politically straightforward. People who kill police officers should stay in prison. Andy Burnham clearly thinks so, but right now he's actually struggling to guarantee that. Because Britain is running out of prison cells, so from October, thousands of offenders will be released even earlier from their sentence. Among them, it could be the killers of PC Andrew Harper. He was dragged behind their getaway car as he was responding to a theft of a quad bike back in 2019. The Prime Minister says he is determined to stop that release.
What I have done since I came into office is push the system every single day to go further. I've not accepted it's impossible to do more. I believe there is more that can be done. So today I have asked the Justice Secretary to present a plan in early September to Parliament to go further so that we do not have to release as many people early.
But here's the thing, did the government even start in the right place? Was releasing violent criminals really the only way to free up capacity? And when this scheme does get going, what effect will it have on an already perilously overstretched probation service? So with all that in mind, I sat down with Danny Shaw, Home Affairs commentator, who also served as an advisor to Labour in the run-up to the 2024 general election. Danny, we've become so used to hearing it that it's almost become a shorthand. Prisons are in crisis, prisons are at breaking point. When the politicians say that, what are they actually referring to?
Well, when they say that prisons are at breaking point, what they really mean is there's no space, there's no room at the inn. The prison population is over 86,000 across England and Wales. There is some headroom, there is some free space at the moment, around about 2,000 spare cells, spare spaces for prisoners. But the problem is the population is increasing every month. It's forecast to carry on rising by around 3,000 a year for the next few years. And even though new prisons are being built and are being planned, and other spaces, sort of porter cabin style spaces and that kind of thing are coming on stream, the provision of new places would not be sufficient to cope with the projected rise in the population over the coming years. So that's why we are in a situation where the government is introducing some measures to release prisoners early from their sentences so that space can be freed up and people can be sentenced to prison, and the courts can be confident that there's enough room for them if they do that.
Is that the only consequence of us not having sufficient prison spaces? That, in essence, if you get convicted of a crime, you might not be ending up in jail quite so quickly?
It's not the only consequence. The other situation is then prisons are running close to full capacity. They can't provide the type of regime that will allow prisoners to undertake courses that would possibly give them a chance not to reoffend when they come out. They don't perhaps have enough time to do the training, to do the education, to do the sort of work that they might do in prison that would give them the skills and the experience so that they can lead law-abiding lives afterwards. And also very crowded prisons, are a cauldron of dissatisfaction, bullying, debt, violence. Drugs are getting into prisons that are overcrowded with staff that are not able to deal with those sorts of problems. And so the whole thing is combustible.
But perhaps the most galling thing for a lot of people is the fact that we have been here before. That not just in terms of early release from sentence, currently you leave after 2/3 of your sentence unless something has gone wrong whilst you were inside. But on top of that, we also saw the Conservative government, deploying emergency measures to release the pressure on the system in the past.
actually early release schemes go back even further than the Conservatives. I remember when Jack Straw was Justice Secretary at the tail end of the last Labour government in around 2008 to 2010, and he introduced an early release scheme because of capacity pressures then, and that was despite the fact that that Labour government had actually built a lot of new prison places. The Conservatives had to do an early release scheme under Rishi Sunak, which was a bit sort of cobbled together at the last minute and didn't work terribly well. And then Shabana Mahmood, when she came in as Justice Secretary under Labour in 2024, introduced early release measures, which meant that people who would be getting out at 50% of their sentence were now being freed at the 40% mark. So we've had a succession of early release schemes. The main problem, Neil, is that prison building programmes have not kept pace with rises in the prison population, which have been caused predominantly by the fact that people are going to prison for longer. Sentences have got longer because of a whole raft of measures introduced by successive governments, responding to a sense that prison has got to be more punitive, and that offenders who've committed really serious crimes have got to spend longer behind bars. And so the response has been to ramp up sentencing, and all the figures show that that has happened, but without the commensurate increase in prison capacity, and that's why we're in the situation we're in.
So when October rolls round and this new scheme comes into place, what exactly changes?
So the scheme that Keir Starmer first introduced back in 2024 under Shabana Mahmood was, as I said, prisoners serving 50% would be released at 40% mark, and there were exclusions for the most serious offenders. What the government has proposed and Parliament has legislated for is a entirely new regime in prisons, whereby if you're serving a fixed term, determinate sentence, you will serve 1/3 in custody, and unless you behave very badly in prison, you will get out after 1/3. Then there'll be 1/3 of the time when you're supervised with quite strict conditions by probation, and then 1/3 you will be nominally on licence, but it will be very light touch supervision. So it's called 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. So release at the 33% mark, compared to now release at the 40% mark. For more serious offenders, it will be release at the 50% mark instead of release at the 2/3 point.
Just to be absolutely clear, Danny, I mean, I've heard the government previously refer to this as earned release, but as you say, unless you behave really badly in prison, you're going to get out early from your sentence. You don't have to show that you are sorry for what you've participated in. You don't have to demonstrate any form of rehabilitation. You just have to avoid getting into bother. That's
essentially it. When this was first announced by Shabana Mahmood when she was Justice Secretary, you might remember she did a visit to Texas, the US state, where they have this kind of earned progression model where prisoners can get out early, but only if they really behave well and do various constructive things in prison. And she took film crews along, and it was to say, look, we're copying an idea from this toughest American state, Texas. If it's good enough for Texas, it's good enough for the UK. That was the message, and it was broadly welcomed. The reality is that it's not an earned release model. It might say it is, but it is, as you say, you will get out at the third, after serving 1/3 of your sentence, unless you do some really bad things in prison, unless you behave really badly in prison. And in fact, that's almost the case now. So the idea of this earned progression model, adopted from Texas, was really a fig leaf to hide the fact that we needed another early release scheme, and this is it.
And certainly, earned release would not be words that leap instantly to mind when it comes to the three individuals responsible for the death of PC Harper, Jessie Cole, Albert Bowers and Henry Long. But even with those three, there is a difference. Two of them, Jessie Cole and Albert Bowers, are eligible, but Henry Long is not. Just explain that difference.
Yeah, Henry Long is not eligible for early release because although he was jailed for manslaughter over PC Harper's death, he was given an extended determinate sentence, which means it's a sort of fixed term sentence with a bit of extra time added onto it. And all those sentences, called EDS, extended determinate sentences, are not included in the early release scheme. So he was automatically excluded. And I think the government, when they announced those exclusions, probably thought, well, we're excluding life sentence prisoners and people on EDS sentences, so those are enough exclusions from the model. But of course, the other two, Bowers and Cole, are included in the early release scheme because they have a fixed term sentence for manslaughter. There's no extra bit for them, and all fixed term sentences are in the ambit of the early release scheme, as was initially devised by the government, and as I say, passed through both houses of Parliament. And I mean, I do actually think that that's where it went wrong. It was in the design of it that went wrong. David Lammy was the Justice Secretary at the time. I do blame him, his officials and advisors, for not seeing that there was an injustice here and that some very serious criminals will be coming out of prison early, and the upset and distress that would cause to victims, and also the political ramifications of that.
I mean, bearing in mind the fact that more often than not, when you and I talk, Danny, the weight and force of public opinion often collides with the immovable object that is the law. But in the minds of the majority of people in this country, it is really, really simple. These two were involved in the death of a police officer. The Prime Minister should intervene to stop them being released. Why can't he?
Well, he can. He initially looked at the scheme, and then he excluded various offences. He excluded people convicted of rape and serious sexual offences from the scheme. And I think at that point he thought, well, I've probably done as much as I can do within the constraints of prison capacity. But what he didn't realise was that there would be so much upset caused by the fact that people convicted of manslaughter, like two of PC Harper's killers, were being released and were still not excluded from the scheme. Because every, I think, right-minded person, when you just step back at it, to release people who've killed someone early in order to free up space in prisons that are full of people who've been convicted of non-violent offences is just not right, particularly when they've killed a police officer in the line of duty. I think that Burnham's problem is, he was saying, look, if I just exclude Bowers and Cole, I will be excluding a very narrow range of people, and I'm not sure legally that I can do that. Mm-hmm. If I exclude all manslaughter cases, that's going to be 400 to 500, and we don't have the prison space to be able to do that either. And I think he was getting advice. Obviously, he's come in, he's not an expert on prison population and numbers and capacity. He's getting advice from people at the Ministry of Justice, from civil servants and others who are giving him this. And I think his mistake was just not pushing harder at the beginning and saying, no, this isn't right. You can find space. You can find space in prisons where you have 3,500 women locked up, where you have 15,000 people on remand who haven't even been convicted of sentences locked up, and where you have 2,700 people serving sentences of under 12 months locked up, and lots of non-violent criminals in those categories and others. There must be a way of doing it, and I think he should have been more insistent several weeks ago.
Assuming that they can find some sort of workaround, perhaps a category of the killing of emergency workers, some have suggested, doesn't he then open up Pandora's box once more? I mean, as soon as he draws this line in the sand, it says, of course, Harper's killers, their crime is too serious for them to be let out. There must be, well, goodness knows, how many other people within the system who fall just the other side of that line, and presumably the families of those victims will be, or even the victims themselves, will be doing exactly as the family of PC Harper have done: go to the papers, go to the news, go to the Prime Minister and complain about it.
Well, that's right. Wherever you draw the line, there are going to be some people that sit just outside the line who are still going to be included in the early release scheme, and that's the problem. And that's probably initially why he didn't want to just single out the Harper case. But I think this case has got such momentum now. It's become so big. I think 1 million people have signed a petition. I mean, this is unprecedented. It's got to a point where he has to address it. And even if that means there is some people who will be out of scope and there will be some other campaigns and unhappiness, he will have to draw the line somewhere. We don't know exactly how he's going to do it, but I think that, there is, with a bit of imagination and political will, you can create the space and ensure that people convicted of the most violent crimes and serious sex offenders remain behind bars until the period when they were due to come out anyway.
Again, I suppose we should labour the point, because a lot of people, I suspect, imagine that these individuals are going to be released under this new early release scheme come October. They're going to be released and they're straight back into the community and they can carry on living their lives as normal. They will be coming out and they will be getting supervised by the probation service. I suppose the only problem with that is they're a bit busy at the moment.
Yeah, the probation service is hugely overwhelmed. I think they're currently, the probation service across England and Wales supervises about 250,000 or more offenders. Now, some of those are people who've been given community orders. Some of them, I think the majority of them, are people who've been in prison, have been released under conditions. And it's the job of probation staff to monitor them. Now, sometimes that is fairly light touch. And it may be just ensuring they turn up for appointments. And sometimes with the more risky offenders, it's fairly intensive. They may be tagged, they may be curfewed, and there then has to be liaison with the private companies that are involved in ensuring that they comply with the tags and curfews and so on. So it does vary. But what we know from across the country is that the probation service is underperforming. Independent inspection reports that have said that about, I think, every single area in the country. And they're underperforming particularly on assessing risk and public protection, which are probably the two things that the public are most concerned about. And, now that the reason for that is partly because they have very high caseloads, so they haven't had the investment in the resources. The sort of optimum number of probation officers they haven't reached across the country. I think it's about 1,500 short. A lot of the probation staff that are doing these work are very inexperienced. They've been recruited in the last few years. They tend to be graduates in their 20s with the best will in the world, and the commitment, determination they have, they don't have much life experience. And some of the offenders that you're dealing with are manipulative, they're dangerous, they're devious, and I do think that we need in the probation service people who are a bit older, who have a bit more life experience and are able to perhaps, see the offenders who are, trying to pull the wool over their eyes from those that are sort of honestly trying to, steer a straight path. So there are lots of problems with the probation service, and now we learn that they potentially are looking at industrial action, and it's principally over their concerns about workload. It's not about pay, though the pay isn't great. It's about workload and wanting some reassurances around that.
Given the state of the probation service, given the legal stramash and the PR disaster that this scheme has become, perhaps better it would have been for the government to focus on freeing up prison places or building new ones. I mean, how much could be done in that regard?
It takes years to build a prison. What the government possibly should look at is whether or not they could repurpose possibly one women's prison. There are 12 women's prisons at the moment. It's very important that there is a network of women's prisons so that the women who are held in prison, and there are some women that do have to be locked up, are near courts and are near their families so they can get visits, and they're near the communities where they're going to be released. That's important. But it could be possible, I think, to free up one women's prison, possibly in the southeast, potentially, and re-roll it into a men's prison if you release some women into more sort of halfway hostels, community centres in the country. The problem is that there aren't enough of them.
I mean, you say absolutely correctly, of course, that it takes years to build proper, decent prisons. But this problem has been emerging over years. We have seen failures by successive governments over decades for us to arrive at the position that we're in right now, haven't we?
Look, I think on prison building, I think the previous Labour government built quite a lot of prison places, and the Conservative government built, thousands of prison places. The problem particularly with the last Conservative government, is that they closed almost as many prison places as they built. And they did that in the first 5 or so years of the government to save money. Now, there is a prison building programme underway at the moment, but they've been delayed because of planning problems, because local people have objected. At the same time, there's a prison in Devon, Dartmoor Prison, would hold about 600 male prisoners. It's completely closed at the moment because radon gas was discovered underneath it, so it's not safe. So that you've got 600 places at a stroke wiped out of the estate. So, that's a problem when you have got a prison estate where you've got a lot of older buildings that are unfit for purpose. Even if you're building new prisons, you sort of can't keep up.
That's your lot for today. We're back tomorrow.